David Miller was a 35-year-old mechanic living in a small town in Nevada. His life was simple and predictable, working every day in the family-owned auto repair shop. The warm August sun bathed the town in light as David worked under the hood of a car, the sound of the engine hum filling the shop. The steady rhythm of his day was broken when his phone rang, vibrating against the wooden workbench. Looking at the screen, David saw the name Jason, his best friend from high school. It was odd for Jason to call him during work hours, especially when they usually just talked shop or discussed their shared projects in person. David answered with a casual, "Hey man, what's up?" Jason's voice came through the phone, but there was something different about it. It wasn't the usual playful tone or the easygoing banter they shared. Jason sounded tense, almost shaky. "David," Jason said, his voice low and urgent. "I need to talk to you. Can you meet me later? It's really important." David paused. His heart skipped a beat. Jason wasn't the kind of person who got worked up over small things. He was the calm, level-headed one, the guy who never seemed rattled. For Jason to call him this way, there had to be something serious going on. "Yeah, sure," David replied, his curiosity piqued. "I'll meet you later." "What's going on?" "I can't explain over the phone," Jason said quickly. "Just meet me at the cafe in town at 7. Please, David. This is important." With that, Jason hung up. David stood there, staring at the phone in his hand, the heavy weight of unease settling over him. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. His mind raced, running through possibilities, but none of them made sense. Whatever Jason needed to talk about, it was serious, and that was enough to make David's pulse quicken. He went back to work, but his focus was broken. Every few minutes, his mind drifted back to the conversation, to the strange urgency in Jason's voice. It felt as if the world had shifted on its axis in that single phone call. When the workday finally ended, David found himself driving to the cafe with a knot in his stomach. The streets of the small town were quiet, the sun beginning to set as he pulled into the parking lot. Jason was already there, sitting at a table by the window, his eyes scanning the room restlessly. David could see the tension in his friend's posture, the way he fidgeted with his hands, something David had never seen Jason do before. David walked over, took a seat across from him, and without wasting any time, Jason leaned forward. "David, I'm not sure how to tell you this, but you need to know. I saw Emma tonight." David blinked, confused. "Emma? What do you mean you saw Emma? Where?" "At a restaurant on the outskirts of town," Jason said, his voice strained. "I saw her there with someone. And it wasn't just anyone. It was a man, a stranger, but they were close, David. Too close." Jason paused, and David's mind raced. Emma, his wife, had been acting distant lately. He chalked it up to work, to the pressures of their busy lives. But now, hearing Jason's words, a cold knot formed in his chest. Something wasn't right. Jason pulled out his phone and slid it across the table. On the screen was a picture, grainy and taken from a distance, but clear enough to make David's heart drop. It was Emma sitting at a table in a fancy restaurant, laughing with a man David didn't recognize. The man's hand rested on the back of her chair, too familiar, too intimate. David's eyes locked onto the photo. The scene was undeniable. "This can't be real," David muttered under his breath, his throat dry. The words felt foreign, as if he couldn't quite comprehend them. "I'm sorry, David," Jason said quietly. "I didn't want to be the one to tell you, but you need to know. I couldn't just keep this from you." David leaned back in his chair, the image of Emma with another man searing into his mind. His wife, the woman he had trusted for years, the woman he'd built a life with, was betraying him. The world around him seemed to spin, and the cafe, the quiet evening, everything felt distant. It was as if the ground had shifted beneath his feet, leaving him unmoored, floating in disbelief. His hands trembled as he gripped the edge of the table, trying to steady himself. "No, this can't be true. She's been busy, that's all. She's always busy." Jason's expression was pained. "I know, man. But I'm telling you what I saw. I had to show you. You deserve the truth." David sat there, unable to speak, his mind reeling with the implications of what he had just seen. For years he had been blind, trusting Emma's every word, believing in her. But now it felt as if the foundation of everything he knew had cracked wide open. The woman he loved, the woman he had built his life around, had lied to him. "I don't know what to do," David said softly, his voice hoarse. "I don't know how to fix this." Jason's eyes were filled with sympathy, but there was little he could say. "I don't know, man. But you have to do something. You deserve more than this." David stood up abruptly, his heart heavy with anger and hurt. "I need to go," he muttered. Without another word, he left the cafe, his mind in turmoil. His thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion, rage, and betrayal. He knew he had to confront Emma. But how could he even begin to ask her about this? How could he look her in the eyes after everything Jason had shown him? As David drove home, his mind raced. The night that was supposed to be normal, the day that had started so simply, was now the start of something that would change everything. He knew he couldn't let this slide. He needed answers, and he needed them now. But what he didn't realize was that what awaited him at home would be the hardest confrontation of his life. David's mind was spinning as he pulled into the driveway of his modest house. The house that had once felt like a sanctuary now seemed like a prison. Each step he took toward the door heavier than the last. He tried to steady his breathing, but his pulse raced, his heart beating with a mix of dread and anger. The photo Jason had shown him kept flashing in his mind. Emma laughing with that man. The intimate way they sat together. The way his hand had rested too familiarly on her chair. David knew he couldn't wait any longer. He needed answers. He needed to know if what Jason said was true. He needed to know if the woman he had shared his life with for so long had betrayed him. The door creaked as David opened it, and the familiar scent of their home hit him. The silence in the house felt oppressive, as if the walls themselves knew what was about to happen. Emma wasn't home yet, but David knew she'd be back soon. He could feel it in his bones. The confrontation was inevitable. He moved to the living room and sat on the couch, his hands gripping the fabric tightly, his mind racing. The clock on the wall ticked in the otherwise quiet room, and with each passing second, David's anxiety grew. He tried to distract himself, but every thought kept circling back to Emma, to the image of her with the stranger at the restaurant. He wasn't sure how long he sat there, but it felt like hours before the sound of the front door opening echoed through the house. David stood up quickly, his heart pounding in his chest. Emma's voice drifted from the hallway as she walked in, her tone light and unsuspecting. "David? Are you home?" she called, sounding a bit surprised. "I didn't think you'd be back this early." David's eyes narrowed. He stood in the doorway of the living room watching her. Emma appeared in the doorway, her expression changing as soon as she saw him standing there, his face serious. There was a slight hesitation in her step, a subtle shift that David immediately noticed. "David, what's going on?" Emma asked, trying to keep her voice steady. She closed the door behind her and walked further into the room, but there was something about her that felt off. Her eyes darted around nervously, and her movements were slow, almost calculated. David didn't waste any time. He reached for his phone and brought up the picture Jason had shown him. He held it up, wordlessly showing it to her. Emma froze. Her eyes went wide and her face drained of color. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them felt suffocating. "Emma," David said quietly, his voice shaking with a mixture of hurt and disbelief. "What is this? Who is he?" Emma opened her mouth, but no words came out at first. She looked at the photo, then back at David, her eyes flickering with guilt. "David, she began, but she faltered, clearly struggling to find the right words. "It's not what you think." David's heart sank, and the anger inside him began to burn. "Not what I think. How is this not what I think, Emma? You're sitting at a restaurant with another man and you look comfortable. Too comfortable. What am I supposed to think?" She shifted uneasily, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, her eyes darting away from his. "David, please just let me explain." Her voice was shaky, but she reached out as if to bridge the gap between them. But David wasn't having it. The betrayal was too raw. "No," he said, his voice cold. "No more excuses. I want the truth, Emma. Now." Emma took a deep breath, her shoulders trembling. She seemed to shrink in on herself, her entire demeanor deflating under the weight of David's gaze. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke. She paused again, collecting herself, her eyes glistening with tears. "I've been seeing someone. His name is Marcus. I've been seeing him for the past 3 months. David's chest tightened as the words landed, each one cutting deeper than the last. He could hardly breathe as Emma continued, the truth finally spilling out. "I didn't mean for it to happen. Everything felt so complicated and I didn't know how to talk to you about it. I didn't want to lose you, David." The words stung like 1,000 needles. David took a step back, his entire body tense. His mind reeled. The woman he had shared his life with, the mother of his children, had been hiding a secret from him for months. 3 months. That was a long time to live a lie, and now it was all crashing down on him. "Emma?" His voice was strained, barely above a whisper. "How could you do this to me? To us?" Emma was crying now, her face crumpling in sorrow. I'm so sorry, David. I never meant for it to go this far. I felt so alone sometimes. And Marcus, he made me feel seen. I thought I could handle it, but I can't. I've ruined everything." David stood there, unable to respond at first. His mind was swirling. He could barely process the words. He had trusted her completely, believed in the life they had built together, and now it was all shattered. The dreams they had shared, the future they had planned, it was all gone in an instant. Emma's sobs filled the silence, but David couldn't bring himself to comfort her. His mind was racing, the realization settling in that their marriage was over. There was no going back from this. He took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside him. "You're going to call him. Now," David said, his voice low and firm. "You're going to end it with him, Emma? I don't want any part of this." Emma nodded, her hands trembling as she pulled out her phone. She hesitated, staring at the screen for a long moment, before she finally dialed the number. David stood by, his arms crossed, watching as she spoke to Marcus, her voice barely audible. He could hear the desperation in her tone, but it was too late for apologies. As the conversation ended, David felt a strange sense of relief wash over him. It was over. But that relief was fleeting. Deep down, he knew that this was only the beginning of a long, painful journey. The life he had known was gone, and he wasn't sure how to rebuild from the rubble. The house felt colder now, emptier, as if the very walls were aware that everything was changing. Emma stood there, her phone still in her trembling hand, her shoulders slumped in defeat. David watched her, feeling a mixture of anger, disbelief, and sorrow that he could not shake. He couldn't look at her the same way anymore, not after what she had confessed. David's mind was clouded with questions, but the only one that seemed to matter was the one he had already asked himself 1,000 times. How could she do this? How could the woman he loved, who had shared his life, his dreams, and their children, betray him like this? Emma wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, still visibly shaken by the call. "David," she whispered, her voice broken. "I never wanted to hurt you. You have to believe me." But David couldn't find it within himself to forgive her. The raw wound in his chest was too deep, too fresh. "I don't know what to believe anymore, Emma. You've lied to me for months. You've been seeing someone else, and now you expect me to just believe that you didn't mean to hurt me?" He ran a hand through his hair, pacing back and forth. His anger was beginning to boil over, but it wasn't just anger, it was hurt. The kind of hurt that burned so deeply that every word, every movement felt like it added salt to the wound. He had trusted her completely, and now he was standing here, watching everything he had built unravel. "David," Emma pleaded, stepping toward him, but he took a step back, holding his hand out as a barrier. He couldn't let her close. "Not now. Not after everything." "Don't," he said, his voice tight. "I don't want you near me right now." She froze, looking at him with pleading eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered, as if those words could undo the damage that had been done. But David knew it was too late for apologies. David couldn't stay in that house another minute. The silence, the tension, it was suffocating. He needed space to think, to breathe. "I need to go," he said, his voice firm as he turned toward the door. Emma's face crumpled as if she knew what was coming, but she didn't stop him. She didn't try to hold him back. She had already lost him. David stepped outside, feeling the cool night air hit his face as he walked toward his truck. The world seemed quieter outside, but inside, his heart was a storm. He wasn't sure where he was going or what he was doing. He just needed to be away from that house, away from the woman who had broken his trust in the most devastating way possible. He drove aimlessly, the headlights of his truck cutting through the darkness, but his mind never stopped racing. Images of Emma with Marcus, of their happy moments together, flooded his mind, each one a cruel reminder of how easily his world had been shattered. He thought about the children, his kids. They had no idea what was going on. They were innocent, caught in the middle of a mess that had nothing to do with them. But the thought of his children only deepened his despair. How would he explain this to them? How would he tell them that their mother wasn't the person they thought she was? How could he protect them from the pain that was inevitable? David parked his truck on a quiet street, the engine still running as he sat there, staring blankly ahead. He couldn't go back. Not yet. Not until he figured out what to do next. He thought about the divorce papers he'd need to file, the custody battle he might face for the kids. He thought about everything that had been torn apart and the long road ahead of him. His phone buzzed in his pocket and he glanced down. It was a message from Jason. "I'm sorry, David. I wish I didn't have to be the one to tell you. If you need to talk, I'm here." David's fingers hovered over the screen, but he didn't respond. "Not yet. Jason had been there for him as a friend, as a brother. But right now, David couldn't even form the words to explain how he felt. He didn't know what to say. With a sigh, he put the phone down on the passenger seat and stared out at the street ahead. The quiet of the night was almost deafening, and all he could hear was the sound of his own thoughts, looping endlessly. He wanted to scream, to punch something, to make it all stop. But there was no way to make it stop, no way to go back to the way things were before. After what felt like an eternity, David finally made up his mind. He had to go back. He had to face Emma and figure out what came next. He couldn't stay out here forever. As he drove back home, he kept repeating the same thought over and over. This was the end. His marriage, his family as he had known it, was over. But the hardest part was yet to come. The inevitable confrontation that would mark the beginning of a new chapter in his life. And no matter how much he wanted to avoid it, he knew there was no turning back now. David parked his truck back in the driveway, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. The house loomed in front of him, silent and uninviting, like a fortress he no longer belonged in. He didn't know how he was going to face Emma again. What could he possibly say to her? There were no more words left, just the hollow feeling in his chest and the brutal reality of what their marriage had become. He took a deep breath before getting out of the truck and walking toward the door. The night air was cold against his skin, but it didn't do anything to numb the pain inside him. Every step he took felt like a march toward something inevitable. The door creaked as he pushed it open, stepping inside. The house was just as he had left it, except now, everything felt off, like it no longer belonged to him. Emma was sitting on the couch, her face hidden in her hands as she cried quietly. The sight of her, broken and vulnerable, only made David's heart ache even more. But the truth was, he couldn't bring himself to comfort her. Not now. He had tried so hard to trust her, to believe in their life together, but all of that had shattered the moment he saw the photo with Marcus. "David," she said softly, looking up at him as he stepped into the room. Her eyes were red from crying, her voice raw. "I'm so sorry. I don't know how to fix this. I don't even know if it can be fixed." David stood there, his arms crossed over his chest, staring at her. He could feel the coldness between them now. There was no turning back. The trust they once shared had been completely destroyed. He could see the pain in her eyes, but all he felt was emptiness. "I don't know what you want me to say, Emma," David said quietly, his voice strained. "You've already made your choice. You've been lying to me for months, hiding this from me. I can't just pretend like nothing's wrong." Emma's eyes welled up again and she took a shaky breath. "I never wanted to hurt you. I never meant for it to go this far. Just happened. I was so lost and I didn't know who else to turn to." David shook his head, the weight of everything pressing down on him. He didn't want to hear excuses anymore. It didn't matter why it happened. What mattered was the reality of it. She had betrayed him, and no apology would undo that. "I don't know what to do anymore, Emma," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I can't stay in this. I can't live in this lie anymore." Emma's lips trembled as she stood up, her voice pleading. "Please, David, I love you. I've always loved you. This is the biggest mistake of my life. I'll do anything to make it right." David's heart wrenched at her words, but it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. The damage had been done, and no amount of love or regret could repair the trust that had been shattered. He turned away from her, walking toward the door. "I'm sorry, Emma. I can't do this. I need to move on." The words felt like they were being ripped from him, each one more painful than the last. He didn't want to leave, didn't want to walk away from the life they had built, but he knew it was the only choice he had left. The decision was made and there was no going back. Emma's sobs filled the air, but David didn't turn around. He couldn't bear to see her like this, to see how badly she was hurting, because it only made the situation worse. He couldn't save her anymore. He couldn't fix this. When he stepped out of the house and into the cool night air, David felt a strange sense of finality. It was over. His marriage, his life with Emma was over. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew that the only way to heal was to move forward. Days passed, and the weight of what had happened settled heavily on David's shoulders. He filed for divorce not because he wanted to, but because he knew there was no other way. He had to protect himself, and most importantly, he had to protect his children. They needed stability. They needed to feel safe. The legal process was messy, and the emotional toll it took on him was overwhelming. Emma fought for joint custody, but David, knowing the impact this would have on their children, fought just as hard. He wanted them to stay with him, to shield them from the heartbreak that came with their mother's betrayal. In the weeks that followed, Emma moved out of the house. She found a job at a small cafe in another town, far away from the life she had once known. She had lost everything: her job, her family, and the comfortable life she had once taken for granted. The shame of the scandal and the guilt of her actions weighed heavily on her, but it didn't change the fact that their marriage was over. David, on the other hand, focused on his children. He threw himself into work, repairing cars and keeping the shop running. He didn't have time for much else. His children became his priority. Every moment he had, he devoted to them, helping them with homework, taking them to their games, and making sure they knew they were loved. The pain of the divorce, the loss of his marriage, still lingered, but as time passed, David realized something. The love he had once given to Emma was now being poured into his children. They needed him. They were his reason to keep going, and for the first time in a long time, David felt a small glimmer of hope. Though he would never forget the pain Emma had caused, he knew that he had to move forward. For himself. For his kids. And even though the scars of the past would remain, they wouldn't define him. The future was uncertain, but David was ready to embrace whatever came next, one step at a time.